My whole life I spent training. Day after day it was the same. Sword, stance, repetition, over and over again without rest. But while everyone else kept progressing, I always fell behind. No matter how hard I tried or how many times I fell and got back up, it was never enough. I was born into a family where geniuses seemed like monsters, and compared to them, I was just average. And in that place, being average was exactly the same as being weak. I studied everything I could: strategy books, swordsmanship, history, military tactics. If there was a way to improve, I was going to find it. If there was something to learn, I wasn't going to let the opportunity slip by. I truly believed that if I worked harder than everyone else, I would eventually catch up to them. But that never happened. While I spent my days studying and training, they were simply born strong. I had to fight for every small step forward, while they seemed to advance without even trying. And as if that weren't enough, my own siblings never missed a chance to remind me how weak I was. Every mistake, every stumble, and every defeat gave them a reason to mock me. Pathetic, useless, you'll never amount to anything. At first, those words devastated me, but over time they stopped hurting. They simply became a part of my life. The only exception was Elena, my older sister. She was the only person who never looked at me as if I were a failure. While everyone else saw only my weaknesses, she always saw the effort behind every attempt. When others laughed at me, she stood by my side. "Don't push yourself too hard. I'm here for you," she used to tell me. I never understood why. Elena was strong, respected, and admired by everyone. She had no reason to care about someone like me. And yet, she was always there. In a world where no one believed I was worth anything, she was the only person who made me feel that perhaps I still had a place. Over time, I ceased to be invisible, not because I had grown stronger, but because my family finally found a way to turn my existence to their advantage. They used me as a pawn in a marriage of convenience. They never asked what I wanted. They simply told me it was for the good of the family. And, as always, I accepted it without a word. That was when I met her. At first, I thought she would be just like everyone else, cold, distant, and polite only out of obligation. But I was wrong. She was different. She never looked at me with scorn, never mocked me, and never compared me to anyone else. She simply treated me like a human being. Little by little, we began spending time together. We talked about anything and everything, walked through the city, and before I knew it, every conversation made me feel a little more at ease. For the first time in a long while, I stopped feeling like I was just a burden. Her smile never seemed forced, and her voice conveyed a warmth I had never known before. Without realizing it, I began to believe in something that had seemed impossible until then, that perhaps someone could truly care for me, not because of my surname or out of obligation, but simply for who I was. And so, I began to look forward to seeing her every day. I sought out any excuse to be with her, enjoyed her company, and gradually learned to trust her. Because in a world where almost everything was a lie, she was the only person who felt completely real. The day of the awakening had finally arrived. For any other family, it might have been just an important ceremony. But for mine, it was far more than that. It was the day that determined your worth and whether you deserved to bear our surname. Every one of us who had turned 15 was summoned without exception, while the mansion filled with siblings, uncles, cousins, nobles, knights, and even servants. No one wanted to miss the spectacle. Then the patriarch appeared. He never attended ceremonies like this, but that day was different. One of his favorite sons was also due to awaken, and his mere presence made the atmosphere feel unbearably heavy. It felt like an effort just to breathe. And there I stood, facing them all, surrounded by hundreds of people, yet completely alone. Deep down, I knew that if I failed, no one would care. Even if I were to vanish that very instant, the ceremony would proceed exactly as planned. To my family, I had long since ceased to be anyone of importance. The greatest irony was that, in a hall packed with people watching the ritual, practically no one was paying attention to me. No one except for two people, Elena and her, the only ones still capable of seeing me. And for an instant, just for an instant, I wanted to believe that would be enough. When my name was called, I felt time stand still. I walked to the center of the hall while hundreds of eyes tracked my every step. I knew no one expected much from me. Yet a part of me clung to the hope that this time things would be different. I closed my eyes and could think of only one thing: power. I didn't care what the ability was: a magic swordsman, a holy warrior, anything that would let me stop being the weakest in the family. I just needed a chance to prove I could change my destiny too. Then the light descended upon me. It was warm, intense, and for a moment I felt as though all my prayers had been answered. When the system window appeared, I opened my eyes, my heart pounding like never before. But all that hope vanished the instant I read a single word: shop, rank F. I remember my mind going completely blank. It wasn't a combat skill, nor magic, nor anything capable of making me stronger. It was an ability one would expect to find in a common merchant or a villager. I lowered my head, not daring to look at anyone. I didn't even need to hear their mockery to know what they were thinking. Shame consumed me from within, and in that moment, I realized that even the one day I believed my life might change had ended in failure. The moment the patriarch saw my ability, he made an instant decision. He didn't even want to hear an explanation. He didn't doubt. He didn't hesitate. He simply pointed to the exit. Get out. That single word was enough to end everything. From that moment on, I was no longer part of the family. I lost my surname, my home, my status, and the future I had fought for my entire life. I remember hearing the murmurs around me. Looks of contempt, mockery, and whispers filled the hall. Yet they sounded increasingly distant. It was as if my mind had drifted away. Then the real pain began. It wasn't physical pain, but something far deeper. I felt as though my head were splitting in two as thousands of memories surfaced from nowhere. Memories that didn't belong to this life. I saw giant cities, illuminated streets, buildings, screens, money, a world completely different from the one I knew. And along with those images came emotions I had never felt before: striving, regret, loneliness, and the memory of another life that had also ended in failure. That was when I understood what was truly happening. Those memories weren't an illusion. They were mine. I had lived another life before this one, and now I was remembering it in full. As my family cast me out, believing they had destroyed my future, they had actually awakened the greatest opportunity I had ever known. This wasn't the end of my story. It was the beginning of my second life. Before walking through that door, I looked up one last time. I wasn't looking for pity. I just wanted to know if even one person regretted what was happening. First, I looked at Elena, my sister, the only one who had always stood by my side. But when our eyes met, I no longer saw the usual affection. I found only disappointment. It was as if a part of me finally shattered. Then I looked at her, the woman who had made me believe I could still be loved. For a time, I thought her smiles were sincere, that everything we shared had been real. But the expression with which she watched me made it clear. There was no sadness, no regret, only contempt. In that moment, I realized I had been clinging to an illusion. I had never been important to them. I had never been someone worth protecting. While I gave everything I had, they saw nothing but a failure. Curiously, that truth didn't destroy me. It set me free. With the memories of my past life fully awakened, I realized I no longer needed anything from that family. I didn't need their name, their recognition, or their approval. The only thing I needed was the knowledge I had just regained. While they continued to believe they had just cast aside a failure, I could already see a completely different future. I knew things no one in that world could imagine, and for the first time in my memory, I felt true confidence. Without looking back, I took my first step toward the exit. It wasn't the step of someone who had been defeated. It was the step of someone who had just been given a second chance, and who would one day return to show them the worst mistake they had ever made. I left the castle with absolutely nothing. I no longer had a surname to back me up, a home to return to, or a guaranteed future. Yet curiously, I was also free of any chains holding me back. There was only one thing I was certain of. If I wanted to survive in this world, I first had to understand how it worked. And after regaining the memories of my past life, I knew exactly what the true power driving any kingdom was: money. I looked up as I walked through the city. It was enormous, far larger than I remembered. The streets were teeming with merchants, adventurers, artisans, and nobles. There was noise everywhere, but also opportunity. Best of all, no one knew who I was. To these people, I was just another stranger. And this time, that worked entirely to my advantage. My first objective was to find the Merchant's Guild. I asked for directions, followed the signs, and traversed half the city without stopping. It took quite a while, but I was in no rush. I knew that place would be the first step toward changing my destiny. When I finally found it, I stood gazing at the building for a few moments. It wasn't a training ground or a hall where abilities were awakened, yet I was certain that this place would shape my future, far more than any sword ever could. I took a deep breath and walked toward the entrance, because if I had learned anything in my 2 lives, it was that true power didn't always belong to the strongest man. Often, it belonged to the one who understood how to move money. And that was the path I would follow from that moment on. As soon as I stepped through the doors of the Merchant's Guild, I realized the place never slept. People were negotiating in every corner. Merchants sealing deals, adventurers selling materials, and messengers coming and going without pausing for even a second. It was chaos, but a perfectly organized chaos. Something important was happening, though I didn't have the time right then to figure out what it was. Without wasting a moment, I walked straight to the counter. If I wanted to start a new life, this was the first place I needed to go. The receptionist was an elf with golden hair and a serene gaze. As I approached, her eyes swept over my uniform with keen interest, even though I had just been disowned. The clothes I wore still belonged to one of the kingdom's most influential noble families. That alone was enough to completely change her attitude. Her expression softened, and she greeted me with a professional smile. "Welcome to the Merchant's Guild. How may I help you?" I found it curious. She didn't know who I was. She knew nothing of my history or the fact that I no longer had a home to return to. All she saw was the uniform I was wearing, and in this world, appearances still carried a great deal of weight. Even so, I had no intention of correcting the misunderstanding. If people were going to treat me with respect because of my attire, I would make the most of that advantage while I could. After all, I had learned across my 2 lives that opportunity rarely knocks twice, and this time, I wasn't going to let a single chance slip away. The receptionist gave me a friendly smile and immediately got down to business. "Are you here on business?" I nodded without hesitation. "I want to rent a space to open a shop." Her expression lit up instantly, as if she had been expecting that very answer. "Perfect. In that case, could you show me your membership card?" I fell silent for a moment. I didn't have one. "I'm sorry, I'm not a member of the guild." Her smile didn't vanish, but it became much more professional. "I understand. In that case, is your family registered with the guild?" That question caught me off guard. I lowered my gaze for a moment before answering. "I don't have a family anymore." For the first time, I noticed a shift in her expression. It wasn't contempt, but confusion. Her eyes swept over my uniform again, trying to fathom how someone dressed like a noble could say such a thing. "Then, a sponsor? A merchant who can vouch for you?" I slowly shook my head. That single gesture changed everything. It wasn't anything overt. No one raised their voice or treated me rudely. I simply ceased to be an important client. Without a name, a family, or anyone to back me, I was nothing more than another stranger trying to make his way in the world. Curiously, that didn't discourage me. In fact, it confirmed that I was in the right place. If I wanted to build something that was truly my own, I would have to start exactly there, without privileges, without influence, and without relying on anyone else. After all, the strongest foundations are always built from scratch. The receptionist maintained her pleasant expression while giving a slight shake of her head. "I'm sorry, but I can't help you. To secure space within the guild, you must first be a member. And to become a member, you need the endorsement of a registered merchant or an authorized sponsor." I nodded without arguing. It wasn't an unfair rule. It was simply another barrier for those starting from scratch. I was about to leave when a shout rang out across the hall. "Merchant's Guild!" All conversation ceased instantly. I turned my head and saw a man who was completely beside himself. He was pointing at the staff while screaming at the top of his lungs. "You're monsters! You care only about money and power. You ruin anyone who doesn't have the means to defend themselves." The atmosphere grew awkward. What struck me was that no one responded. No one tried to argue with him or prove him wrong. They simply watched him in silence. That was what caught my attention. Before I could move closer to hear better, several guards appeared and restrained him. The man kept shouting as they dragged him toward the exit. Yet no one present seemed surprised. It was as if this scene had played out before. I stood there watching the door for a few seconds. I didn't know if the man was telling the truth or if he was just desperate. But one thing was certain. His reaction had been too intense to ignore. I took one last look inside the guild and then stepped out of the building. Outside, I saw him walking in the distance, still furious and muttering to himself. After all, I had no reason to stay there either. If I wanted to understand how this world truly worked, I needed to hear every side of the story, not just the official one. So, without drawing attention to myself, I began to follow him. I followed him without making a sound. He walked the entire way with his head down. He didn't look like a dangerous man, just someone utterly defeated. After walking a few blocks, he stopped in front of a small blacksmith shop. The sign was old, the walls were neglected, and there wasn't a single customer in sight. I stepped in behind him without saying a word. "It's closed." His reply was immediate. He didn't even bother to look up. He was holding a bottle, and the smell of alcohol filled the room. "Why is it closed?" He let out a bitter laugh before answering. "None of your business." Anyone else would have walked away after hearing that. Not me. Even so, I'd like to know what happened. The man clicked his tongue and shook his head. "I'm not in the mood to talk." I didn't press the issue. Instead, I began to look around the shop. The forge was still in good condition. The shelves were stocked with goods. And, most importantly, the shop was located on a busy street. The problem didn't seem to be the location, but the owner. That was when an idea struck me. "Would you mind if I used the space by the entrance to sell some products?" The blacksmith finally looked up and studied me with a puzzled expression, as if he couldn't fathom why anyone would ask such a thing. After a few seconds, he took another swig from the bottle and replied indifferently, "Do whatever you want." That was all I needed. There were no contracts, no permits, and no conditions. But there was also no one to stop me from getting started. I looked at the shop entrance, the bustling street, and the empty space in front of the forge. For the first time since being expelled from the castle, I had a starting point. It wasn't a grand shop, nor a famous business, but it was the place where I would begin building everything from scratch. I took a deep breath, and for the first time since awakening my ability, decided to examine it without prejudice. Shop. Up until then, I had viewed it merely as a useless ability, but if I truly wanted a fresh start, I first had to understand the full extent of what it could do. I opened the system menu and began reviewing each option. Shop, stats, skills. Everything was far more complex than I had imagined. Then, I spotted a skill that caught my eye. Set up stall. Let's see what you do. As soon as I activated it, a blue structure appeared before me. It was completely transparent, and I could move it freely across the ground, much like the build mode in a video game. I simply had to point to a spot, and the system would show me exactly where the stall would be placed. I smiled without realizing it. It was far more practical than I had expected. I positioned the structure right in front of the blacksmith's shop, where passers-by would be sure to see it. "This spot works." I confirmed the location, and the blue light vanished instantly. In its place appeared a simple wooden table with a basket resting on top. I stepped closer to inspect it. Inside lay exactly 10 loaves of bread. Nothing else. I stood there in silence for a few moments, gazing at them. Anyone else would have dismissed it as an insignificant stall. A simple table with 10 loaves of bread. Didn't look like the beginning of a grand story. But I didn't see it for what it was at that moment. I saw what it could become. I smiled faintly. After all, every great business starts small, and that humble stall was the first step toward building mine. As soon as I opened the system, a new window appeared before me. Product available. Bread. Purchase price. 1 copper coin. I stared at the information for a few seconds. So, I have to buy the products from the system first. It was a much more logical model than I had expected. The skill didn't create money out of thin air. If I wanted to sell, I had to invest first. It was exactly like any other business. Just as I was about to close the window, a line caught my eye. Special effect. Pleasant aroma. I frowned. A special effect? I picked up one of the loaves and slowly brought it close to my face. As soon as I breathed in its scent, I froze. It was a warm, soft, and sweet aroma. It was vastly different from the coarse, heavy bread I remembered from this world. That scent felt incredibly familiar. Without thinking, I took a small bite. The moment I tasted it, a smile spread across my face. It was exactly the flavor I remembered from my previous life. The crust was slightly crisp, yet the inside was fluffy and light. It was nothing like the hard, dry bread the people of this kingdom were used to eating. I looked down at the basket. There were only 10 loaves, but I no longer saw just 10 simple loaves of bread. I saw a product that practically no one in this world had ever tasted before. And that meant only one thing. I wasn't selling bread. I was selling a completely new experience. Before I knew it, I was smiling. Because I had just discovered that my greatest advantage wasn't the shop skill, it was the knowledge of a world no one else knew. The first few minutes went exactly as I had expected. People walked past the stall, cast a quick glance, and kept going. To them, I was nothing more than another unknown vendor trying to make a living. But little by little, the aroma of the bread began to work its magic. I watched as a woman suddenly stopped. She looked around curiously and took a deep breath. Where's that smell coming from? A young man did the same a few meters further on. It smells incredible. Within seconds, several people began following the scent until they stopped in front of my small stall. I smiled to myself. The special effect was really working. One of the curious onlookers eyed a loaf of bread. What kind of bread is this? I've never seen anything like it, and the aroma is amazing. I calmly picked up one of the loaves. It's a different recipe from what you're used to. Softer, fluffier, and with a completely different flavor. I paused briefly before stating the price. 2 copper coins apiece. The man studied the bread for a few seconds. Then he reached into his pocket, took out the coins, and placed them on the table. Sounds good. Give me 2. I took the coins between my fingers and, for a moment, just stared at them. They were only 4 copper coins, but to me, they meant so much more than that. They were the first coins I had earned on my own, without relying on my family, a surname, or anyone else's money. I handed him the 2 loaves and watched as he walked away with them. Without realizing it, a smile spread across my face. Because in that moment, I knew my idea had worked. That little stall wasn't a game or an illusion. It was a real business, and I had just made my first sale. I simply watched in silence. The first customers held the bread with a touch of skepticism. They studied it for a few seconds before finally taking that first bite. As soon as they tasted it, their expressions shifted completely. This is incredible. It's much softer than I expected. One of them finished chewing and shook his head, still amazed. It's better than the bread from Rosita's bakery. Hearing that name made me pay closer attention. They sell each loaf for 4 copper coins, and this one costs only 2. I don't understand how it can be this good. I smiled to myself. I had just obtained the information I needed. I now knew the market price, and I also knew my product held a clear advantage. I didn't have to say a single word. It was the customers themselves who began to convince the others. You have to try this bread. It's really worth it. It smells amazing. Passers-by began to approach one after another, drawn first by the aroma and then by the comments of those who had already tasted it. Is it true it only costs 2 coins? Are there any left? I simply nodded as I continued to serve them. And that was enough. Little by little, a line began to form in front of my small stall. What had been a simple table with 10 loaves of bread just minutes earlier had now become the center of attention on the entire street. I looked at the basket, then at the people waiting their turn, and for the first time since arriving in this world, I felt a sense of calm I hadn't known in a long time. Because in that moment, I stopped wondering if my plan would work. I already had the answer right before my eyes. That humble stall had just become a real business. The 10 loaves of bread vanished much faster than I had imagined. I looked at the basket. It was completely empty. Then I glanced up at the line. No one had left. On the contrary, more and more people kept arriving. Give me a moment. I grabbed the basket and stepped into the smithy without wasting a second. As soon as I activated the system, the purchase window appeared. Buy. An instant later, the basket was full again with 10 freshly baked loaves. They were still warm, and the aroma was even more intense than before. I smiled. That skill was far more practical than I had imagined. I stepped back out onto the street, and the moment the customers saw the full basket, the atmosphere livened up again. He's back! There's still bread left. Several people raised their hands at once. Give me 3. I want 2. Set aside 4 for me. Coins began to pile up on the table as the loaves disappeared one by one. It was no longer just about the initial curiosity. The first buyers were recommending the bread to those who had just arrived, and the line kept growing. I took it all in for a moment. This was no longer just luck. There was genuine demand. Just then, I heard a loud thud coming from inside the smithy. The blacksmith clicked his tongue in obvious annoyance. The noise from the street was impossible to ignore, so he set his bottle down on the table and walked toward the entrance to see what was happening. When he stepped through the doorway, he froze in place. In front of his shop stood a long line of people waiting to buy, and for the first time in a long while, his old smithy was surrounded by people again. I sensed his presence before I saw him. I looked up, and there he was, standing in front of the smithy with the bottle still in his hand. He was watching the line of customers with a frown, unable to fathom why so many people had gathered outside a shop that hadn't seen a visitor in months. What the hell's going on here? I didn't answer right away. Instead of explaining, I took one of the loaves from the basket and held it out to him. Try it. He eyed it warily, but eventually accepted it. First, he examined the loaf closely. Then he slowly brought it up to his face. The moment he caught the scent, his expression shifted. His eyes widened just a fraction. This smell? He spent a few seconds breathing it in, as if trying to recall something long forgotten. Then he pressed his fingers against the crust. So soft. Finally, he took a bite. He said nothing. He simply kept chewing in silence. I watched the hardness in his face gradually melt away. The weariness, the anger, and even the frustration he carried seemed to vanish with every bite. When he finished swallowing, he let out a sigh that spoke more of calm than any words could. It's incredible. He looked down at the bread and smiled with a sense of nostalgia I hadn't expected to see in someone like him. For a moment, I even forgot all my troubles. Then he looked up and turned his gaze back to the line of customers in front of the stall. There was no longer any annoyance in his eyes. There was curiosity. He handed the bread back to me, and before heading back inside the smithy, said calmly, "When you're done with the sales, come see me." I nodded without a word. As I watched him step back into the shop, I realized that something far more significant than selling another loaf of bread had just taken place. That conversation wasn't the end of a sale. It was the beginning of an opportunity. I stepped back into the smithy just as the sun was setting. I still remember the silence inside. Hours earlier, the place had felt like a tavern filled with frustration. Now, it was just him and me. The blacksmith looked up when he heard my footsteps. The bottle was still on the table, though he had barely touched it again. He didn't look like a defeated man. He looked like someone who had been waiting far too long for a chance to start over. "Sit down." It didn't sound like an order. It sounded like an invitation. I settled in across from him, never taking my eyes off his hands. They were covered in scars, the hands of someone who had worked for decades. And yet, they had ended up holding a bottle instead of a hammer. He slid a glass toward me. "Don't worry, it's grape juice." I took the glass. Neither of us spoke for a few seconds. He was the one who broke the silence. "I was an idiot to you earlier." I gave a small smile. He didn't need to apologize. If he had lived through even one of the lives I remembered, he probably would have reacted the same way. He took a deep breath before continuing. "I was carrying too much on my shoulders, and I ended up taking my frustration out on the wrong person." Then he looked up at me. It was the first time I felt he was truly seeing me, not as a child, not as a customer, but as someone capable of changing things. "I saw what happened outside, and I think you and I should talk business." The blacksmith set the bottle down on the table and let out a long sigh. "My business is dying." He didn't sound angry. He sounded defeated. I let my gaze sweep across the smithy. The weapons were flawless. The workshop was excellent. So why was it empty? "The Merchants Guild wants this property." He pointed to an old document hanging on the wall. "But they can't take it from me. This place belonged to my father, and the king granted it to him personally." Now I understood. They couldn't buy the smithy, so they decided to destroy the owner. My suppliers vanished. Customers stopped coming. They spread rumors, and anyone who did business with me ended up under pressure. He smiled bitterly. In the end, no one came back. I remained silent, weighing every word. The location was excellent. The building was protected, and yet it was on the verge of bankruptcy. Then he pointed at me, "And then you showed up. In just a few hours, you brought in more customers than I had in months. He locked eyes with me. I don't know how you did it, but I see an opportunity. I leaned forward slightly, because I had just realized that this wasn't merely a smithy. It was the opening move of a trade war. I listened to him to the end without interrupting. When he finished, silence filled the smithy once more. I rested my elbows on the table and mentally reviewed everything I had seen that day. The location was excellent. The problem had never been his weapons. The problem was that no one walked through that door anymore. I looked up. If you expect me to sell your swords, that's going to be difficult. The blacksmith didn't answer. He simply waited for me to finish. But if what you want is to breathe new life into this place, that's a different story. A small smile appeared on my face. I can help you. His eyebrows shot up in surprise. How? I shook my head. You'll understand tomorrow. It wasn't the time to explain. First, I needed to prove that my idea worked. The blacksmith let out a soft chuckle before rising from his chair. Tell me one thing. Do you have a place to sleep? I shook my head. No? He pointed to a door at the back of the smithy. Then you do now. You can stay here. I looked at him for a few seconds. I knew this wasn't an act of kindness. We were both betting on the same thing. He trusted that I could save his business. And I just found the perfect place to build my own. The next morning, I didn't set up the stall the way I had the day before. This time, I had a plan. I had a sign made and placed it right in front of the blacksmith's shop. Visit the blacksmith's shop and get a free loaf of bread. It was a simple offer, but enough to spark curiosity. The first ones to stop were a group of adventurers. Free bread? I nodded with a smile. You just have to go inside and take a look. They glanced at one another. After all, sooner or later, they would need to buy gear. They had nothing to lose by going in. I watched them walk through the door as the blacksmith greeted them with obvious surprise. Minutes later, they came out with a new sword and a loaf of bread in hand. The quality of that shop is better than I expected, and the bread was amazing. I smiled to myself. That was exactly what I was aiming for. I didn't need to sell a weapon to every customer. I just needed to get people back into the shop. A busy shop attracts more customers, and more customers generate more sales. The plan was just getting started. The adventurers had come in for the bread, but none of them left right away. They began to look around the smithy with curiosity, picking up swords, examining armor, and testing the sharpness of various daggers. Wow! The quality is better than I expected. This craftsmanship is excellent. One of them picked up a sword and glanced at the price tag. His expression changed instantly. Is this the price? He read it again, convinced he had misread it. It's much cheaper than at the other shops. I smiled faintly. That's because the Merchants Guild doesn't call the shots here. All three of them looked at me at once. What does the guild have to do with it? Before I could answer, the blacksmith stepped forward. They control most of the shops in the city. They set the prices, and everyone has to follow them. His voice sounded calm, but there were years of frustration behind every word. I never agreed to their terms. That's why I can sell my weapons for what they're actually worth. The adventurers exchanged glances. Now it all made sense. So that's why we pay so much at the other shops. One of them placed some coins on the counter. In that case, I'll take this sword. I smiled to myself. The bread had brought the customers in, but the quality, that was what was closing the sales. The line kept moving, customer after customer, until someone broke the rhythm. A woman with purple hair planted herself in front of my stall and spoke without even glancing at the price. I want 50 loaves of bread. For a moment, I thought I'd misheard. 50? That wasn't a normal purchase. She was likely planning to resell them, but I didn't mind. As long as she kept buying from me, we both came out ahead. That's when an idea struck me. If you buy 100, I can give you a discount. Her eyes lit up immediately. Really? I nodded with a smile. 10%. The woman barely hesitated before answering. Then I'll take 100. Coins began to pile up on the table. It was by far the biggest sale I'd made since opening the stall. As I arranged the baskets, I couldn't help but notice her expression. She was smiling, but it wasn't the smile of a satisfied customer. It was the smile of someone who had just found a profitable business opportunity. And, to be honest, I was thinking exactly the same thing. The line kept moving. Business was going better than I had imagined. Every few seconds, new coins landed on the table. Until suddenly, people began to step aside. No one said a word. They simply made way for him. I looked up. A man in his 40s was walking straight toward my stall. He wore an impeccable black suit and white gloves that had never touched the city dust. His bearing was elegant, almost military. He didn't look like an adventurer, nor a merchant, but judging by the crowd's reaction, he was someone important. He stopped in front of the basket and studied the loaves closely. He didn't ask the price, nor did he try to haggle. First, he closed his eyes and inhaled deeply. His expression changed instantly. "What an aroma!" he murmured to himself before looking at me. "May I taste one?" "Of course." I handed him a freshly baked loaf. He held it in his hands for a few seconds, as if examining a work of art. Then he took a small bite. There was no exaggerated reaction, just a slight movement at the corners of his mouth. But it was enough. For an instant, the serious expression he had worn since arriving vanished. He continued chewing slowly, savoring every bite. That was when I realized I wasn't dealing with just any customer. That man, he had come for the bread. But I had a feeling he would end up changing far more than just my sales. The man took the bag. He held it with one hand. 20 loaves. I nodded. "Thank you for your purchase." He placed the coins on the table. He didn't ask the price. He didn't try to haggle. He simply turned around and left. As I watched him walk away, I had the feeling he would be back. And that next time, he wouldn't come alone. Little by little, the street grew quiet again. The last sale was over. The customers began to disperse. At last, silence returned. I took a deep breath. It had been 2 exhausting days, but it had been worth it. I activated the system interface. A blue window appeared before me. Total sales, 500 loaves. Revenue, 1,000 copper coins. Cost, 500 copper coins. Net profit, 500 copper coins. I couldn't help but smile. Just a few days ago, I didn't even have a place to sleep. Now, I had just earned my first 5 silver coins from my own business. It wasn't a fortune, but it was the first brick of something much bigger. The coins vanished from the table and were automatically stored in my inventory. Secure, organized, ready to use at any moment. I closed the system window and looked at the empty stall. 500 loaves in just 2 days. If this was what I could do starting from scratch, I couldn't imagine how far I'd go once my shop evolved. And that thought made me smile. Sales continued, one after another. The air was filled with conversation and the sound of coins clinking on the table, until everything went silent. It wasn't because someone screamed. It was because people stopped talking. All eyes turned in the same direction. I looked up. A man was making his way through the crowd. Tall, obese, dressed in a red suit covered in gold trim. Every step exuded arrogance, and no one dared to stop him. He hadn't come to buy. He hadn't come to ask questions. He kept walking until he stood right in front of my stall. He studied me for a few seconds. Then he raised his leg. Crack! The table snapped in two. Loaves of bread went flying and rolled across the street. Coins clattered to the ground. For a few seconds, no one said a word. I clenched my fists. "What the hell are you doing?" The man let out a mocking laugh. He didn't even seem annoyed. To him, this was the most normal thing in the world. He pointed a finger at me. "Who gave you permission to set up a stall here?" I frowned. Permission? A smug smile appeared beneath his enormous mustache. Exactly. He straightened his back and adjusted his elegant coat. "I represent the Merchants Guild." He paused briefly, as if savoring my reaction. "And this entire district is under our authority." In that moment, I understood. He hadn't come for a table. He had come to remind everyone who ran this city. The crash brought the blacksmith out of his shop. "What the hell's going on?" But upon seeing the scene at the entrance, he froze. The table was smashed to pieces. Loaves of bread lay scattered across the street. And standing before the wreckage was that man. His expression instantly hardened. "You..." He took a step forward and pointed toward the exit. "Get off my property." The guild representative let out a mocking laugh. He didn't even budge. He simply pointed a finger at me. "That boy is selling without authorization." He raised his voice so everyone could hear. "Trading without the guild's permission is a violation of the rules." The blacksmith took another step. "He's selling right in front of my shop, and I was the one who gave him permission." The representative smiled scornfully. "Your permission is worthless." He adjusted his coat with infuriating calm. "This district falls under the authority of the Merchants Guild. The blacksmith stared him down. Not this property. The atmosphere turned icy. No one nearby dared to intervene. The two men stood face to face, locking eyes. Then the representative spoke one last time. If you continue to defy the guild's authority, he paused briefly, and force me to resolve this by the use of force. I looked around. The crowd. The guild guards. The blacksmith. Until that moment, I had simply been selling bread. Now, I had just become the center of a war against the Merchants Guild. When it was all over, I activated the system once more. The window appeared before me. Stall status damaged. I blinked. So, the stall could be destroyed too. It made sense. After all, that fat guy had practically smashed it to pieces. I checked the repair cost. 5 copper coins. It wasn't expensive. Repair. A light swept across the interface. Stall status optimal. I smiled. 5 coins to restore it completely. Much cheaper than building another one from scratch. But then, a new message appeared. New function unlocked. I frowned. What is this? The interface changed completely. Dozens of options appeared before me. Sales permissions. Meat. Vegetables. Fruit. Dairy. Condiments. Beverages. My eyes scanned each category. Each one had a different price. I wasn't buying food. I was buying the right to sell it. That meant my shop could expand. And there was more. Equipment. Refrigerators. Stoves. Tables. Chairs. Utensils. I couldn't help but smile. This was no longer just a simple bread stall. It was a business capable of growing, step by step. I checked my balance. 5 silver coins. It was still very little. But I had a goal now. Bread first. Then food. And someday, I would open the biggest shop in the entire kingdom. I walked into the shop. The atmosphere was quiet. The owner was still sitting there, a glass of wine in his hand. He didn't look up right away. He just let out a bitter laugh. That bastard. He shook his head. He's a real headache. I sat down across from him. Is he the man who's been destroying your business? He nodded without hesitation. Yes. He took a small sip before continuing. Today was the best day I've had in months. He smiled for just an instant, but he saw it. His expression hardened again, and now he knows something is changing. I remained silent. I understood what he was getting at. The owner set his glass on the table. I'm sorry, lad. He paused briefly. But you won't be able to sell here anymore starting tomorrow. I frowned. Is it that serious? He let out a sigh. If the guild decides to step in, he looked me straight in the eye. They won't send merchants. They'll send thugs. Silence filled the room once more. It was no longer about selling bread. We had just gone up against the people who controlled the market. And it was clear that this was only the beginning. Far from the market, where the clamor of the merchants never reached, a servant placed a basket of bread on an elegant table. A young nobleman barely looked up. At first, he paid it no mind. But then, the aroma reached him. He frowned slightly. He picked up one of the loaves out of curiosity. He studied it for a few seconds and took a small bite. His expression changed instantly. The crust crackled softly. The inside was incredibly fluffy. And the taste was unlike anything he had ever experienced. Without realizing it, he took another bite. And then another. A faint smile played on his lips. Incredible. He set the bread down on the table without taking his eyes off it. I have dined at the finest restaurants in the kingdom, but I have never tasted bread like this. He fell silent for a few moments, as if trying to discover the secret behind that flavor. Then he looked up. Alfredo. The butler stepped forward. Yes, my lord. The nobleman held the bread in his hands. Find the man who made this. His eyes gleamed with genuine interest. I want to meet him. And, for the first time, someone of true importance had set their sights on that humble little bread stall. The next morning, the market was still quiet. No lines. No customers. After what happened yesterday, there was no point in staying. I packed up my things and stepped into the smithy one last time. The owner was already waiting for me. Upon seeing me, he placed a small object on the table. Here. I picked it up carefully. It was a badge from the smithy. It's not worth a fortune, but if you ever run into a minor problem, show it. I nodded with a smile. Thank you for trusting me. He let out a soft laugh. No, lad. I'm the one who should be thanking you. He glanced around his shop for a moment. This place hasn't been this lively in years. Then he looked back at me. But you've outgrown this town. He pointed toward the road leading out of the city. If you really want to become a great merchant, go to Nauerston. It's the city where great fortunes are made. I stored the badge in my inventory. I adjusted the pack on my back. And without looking back, I left the city. My adventure as a merchant was just beginning. There was no point in staying. That town had already taught me everything I could learn. If I stayed, I'd just be wasting my time. I adjusted my backpack and walked out the town gates without looking back. As I walked, I had no idea of the disaster I'd left behind. This isn't yesterday's bread. A man slammed his hand hard against the table. We've been duped! Another man held up a piece of bread. It's hard. It doesn't even taste the same. Complaints began to spread throughout the place. Every customer compared that bread to what they'd tasted the day before, and the difference was all too obvious. One of the waitresses tried to calm them down. Please, listen to me. But no one wanted to hear explanations. They wanted the same bread, the real thing. Just then, the door opened. An elegant woman walked into the restaurant. Her gaze swept across the room. The tables, the furious customers, and the bread left sitting on the plates. She frowned slightly. She didn't need to ask many questions. Just by observing the scene, she realized that the man she was looking for was no longer there. The tavern was in chaos. Shouts, tables being banged, customers demanding answers. The owner hurried out. What is happening? A man angrily held up a piece of bread. This is garbage. Another stood up. Yesterday, I tasted bread that seemed made by the gods. He squeezed the bread hard. And today, they sell me this rock for 5 coins. Voices began to blend together. We've been cheated. I want my money back. This is nothing like yesterday's. The owner tried to explain. Please listen to me. But no one was willing to listen. One of the customers pointed to the bread basket. I came back just for that bread, and what I was served today doesn't even come close. The tavern was filled with angry complaints. They weren't upset just because of the taste. They were upset because someone had let them taste something extraordinary, and now they were being offered something ordinary. The owner looked at the bread on the tables, then at the customers, and for the first time, she understood that the problem had never been her tavern. The real problem was that the man who made that bread had already left. Shouts continued to fill the tavern, but she was no longer listening. She took the waitress by the arm. Come with me. They entered the kitchen, and she closed the door. At last, they were alone. She took a deep breath. Now explain this to me. Why aren't we selling that young man's bread? The waitress lowered her head. We ran out. The owner frowned. Then buy more. The young woman slowly shook her head. I can't. What do you mean you can't? The waitress took a deep breath before answering. That merchant. He's already left town. The owner's face went still. He left. Yes. The blacksmith said he set out this morning. I tried to find out where he was going, but he wouldn't tell me. Silence filled the kitchen. The owner clenched her fists. For an instant, rage took over. That idiot. She slammed her hand on the table. He left without a word. She breathed deeply. She closed her eyes, and a few seconds later, she let out a long sigh. No. She shook her head. It wasn't him. She slowly opened her eyes. The problem is that we let the entire tavern depend on a single man. Outside, the customers were still clamoring. But she understood the truth now. She hadn't lost a supplier. She had lost the only man capable of bringing all those people to her business. Shouts continued to fill the tavern, but she was no longer listening. She grabbed the waitress by the arm. Come with me. She led her to the kitchen and closed the door. Tell me, why aren't we selling that boy's bread anymore? The waitress swallowed hard. Because he's gone. The owner frowned. Then go buy more. I can't. Why? He left the territory. Silence. What? The blacksmith said he left. I tried asking where he went, but he wouldn't tell me. The owner clenched her fists. Everything fell into place. The customers, the sales, the chaos. Everything had depended on that bread. She slammed her hand on the table. Damn it. She took a deep breath and closed her eyes. No. She shook her head. It wasn't his fault. She opened her eyes, her expression serious. The mistake was relying on a single supplier. Outside, the customers were still clamoring, but it was already too late. The merchant was already gone. He hadn't come to negotiate or to argue. He had come to collect. It seems the deadline has passed. He placed a document on the counter. The owner didn't even look at it. If you don't pay the debt. He smiled calmly. The smithy becomes mine. Silence. What a shame. He shrugged. But that's how business works. The owner clenched his fists. Business? His voice was thick with rage. You caused all of this. He pointed at the man. You cut off my supplies. You scared away my customers. You manipulated the market. He breathed heavily. This was all your fault. The guild representative didn't even react. He simply maintained that arrogant smile. Call it whatever you like. In the end, he picked up the document and slid it back across the counter. The result will be the same. His gaze slowly swept over the smithy. The weapons, the walls, the forge, as if they were already his property. Because, to him, the shop already had an owner. The atmosphere shifted. An elegant carriage pulled up in front of the smithy. The door opened, and a man stepped out. He was dressed like a nobleman. Behind him, 2 guards. He walked in unhurriedly. His gaze swept across the room. What is going on here? The guild representative smiled. Well, well, if it isn't the butler of the nobleman Benjamin Button. He spread his arms wide. I'm just settling a business matter. The butler barely spared him a glance. I see. He fell silent for a moment. That is not why I came. Everyone watched him. I am looking for the young man who sold bread in front of this shop. The owner sighed. You're too late. He has left this territory. The butler remained silent, as if that answer did not please him. I understand. He turned around. It seems his shop won't be opening today either. He left the smithy, and silence reclaimed the place. Because now, it wasn't just the guild looking for him. The nobility had set its sights on him as well. The butler broke the silence. Do you know where he is? The owner opened his mouth to answer, but the guild representative spoke first. As you can see, he smiled calmly. That lad didn't have permission to sell. That lad didn't have permission to sell. Rules are rules. The owner stepped forward. That's not true. But he was interrupted again. Not just anyone can do business in this territory. The butler remained silent, watching him, sizing him up. Then he spoke. Mr. Orton. The guildman's smile vanished. Yes? Would you be so kind, boss, to let Mr. Winston speak? For the first time, the guild representative hesitated. Yes. Of course. He took a step back. The butler turned his gaze toward the blacksmith. Mr. Winston, the floor is yours. And at last, the truth was about to come out. The butler remained silent. Then he looked at the blacksmith. Mr. Winston. Winston took a deep breath. My smithy doesn't belong to the guild. I gave the boy permission to sell in front of my shop. He pointed at the representative. But this man arrived and demanded he leave. He smashed his stall and threatened him. His voice hardened. He told him that if he didn't disappear, Deeds slit his throat. That's a lie. The guild representative slammed his hand on the table. He's making it all up. But before he could go on, Winston! The door burst open. A woman stormed in. She pointed straight at the representative. I've heard everything. That guild pig just threatened the boy who supplies our bread. The representative's smile vanished. The woman took another step forward. He forced him to leave the city. Silence fell over the smithy. 2 witnesses. The same story. The butler closed his eyes for a moment. He didn't need to ask any more questions. The butler remained silent. Then he slowly adjusted his gloves. I see. He fixed his gaze on the guild representative. All signs point to you as the one responsible for preventing Mr. Benjamin Button from obtaining the bread he so desires. The man swallowed hard. The butler continued. And furthermore, you threatened a civilian who had Mr. Winston's authorization to sell here. Silence fell over the scene. I am afraid you will have to come with us. The representative's eyes widened. What? The butler raised his hand slightly. Guards! The soldiers stepped forward immediately. Take him away. Van tried to back away, but it was already too late. A full investigation will be conducted. His gaze remained cold, and whatever we discover, that will be used against you. The guards seized him by both arms. For the first time, the guild representative stopped smiling, because he had just realized that true power has no need to raise its voice. I was walking calmly along the path, enjoying the sun and the fresh air. The forest was quiet. Leaves rustled in the breeze and birds were singing. But then something shattered that peace. Screams, the sound of splintering wood, and the shrieking of horses. I paused for a moment and looked into the distance. A group of goblins was surrounding a merchant wagon. There were about 6 or 7 of them. Small, filthy, and armed with rusty knives and clubs. They were harassing the merchants, knocking over crates, smashing barrels, and threatening the men. The lead merchant, an older man, was on his knees pleading for mercy. One of the goblins raised its knife toward his throat. I didn't think twice. I ran. My legs moved on their own, swift as the wind. In seconds, I was right in front of them. The goblins turned, startled. "Huh!" one growled, baring its rotten teeth. I didn't answer. I opened my inventory. I drew my sword. The blade gleamed in my hand, catching the sunlight. The goblin holding the knife laughed. "A human? All alone?" It sneered. It didn't finish the sentence. I took a step, and with a single motion, slash. A perfect horizontal cut sliced through its neck. Its head flew off, and its body slumped lifelessly to the ground. The other goblin screamed and lunged at me, but it was too late. I spun my body. Slash! Another diagonal cut sweeping down from above. The sword struck the second goblin in the chest, cleaving it in two. The third tried to attack me from behind. I ducked, spun, and slash! An upward slash tore open its stomach. A fourth one fell to the ground. His club didn't even move. The fifth and sixth backed away, trembling. But the seventh, braver or perhaps just more foolish, charged at me. I smiled. I lunged forward. I drove my sword into his shoulder and used the leverage to spin him around. I threw him to the ground, and before he could get up, slash! A final cut across the neck. The seventh goblin died just like the others. It was all over in less than 10 seconds. Silence returned to the scene. The merchants were in shock. The older merchant approached me, tears in his eyes. Thank you for saving us, young man." Silence returned, as if the fight had never happened. I sheathed my sword while the merchants remained completely motionless. They were still trying to process what had just occurred. Then an older man approached me. His hands were still trembling. Thank you." His voice wavered. "Thank you for saving us, young man." I simply nodded. Then I asked him a question. "Where are you headed?" The man lowered his gaze. "We're fleeing." I frowned. "Fleeing?" He nodded slowly. "From this territory." He paused briefly. "From Lord Benjamin Bouton." He spat on the ground in contempt. "And the Merchants Guild?" He shook his head. "They're a bunch of rats." I listened to his words in silence. Then I replied, "As for me, I'm running away because of them too." The merchant looked at me again, this time with much more curiosity. "But you look like an adventurer. Why would you have trouble with the guild?" I calmly shook my head. "I'm not an adventurer." His expression changed completely. He waited a few seconds before speaking again, and that was when I answered, "I'm a merchant." The merchant kept looking at me, no longer as the young man who had just saved his life. Now he was trying to understand who I really was. After a few seconds, he spoke again. "But you have incredible skill with a sword." His gaze began to sweep over my body. He looked at my waist, my hands, and then he frowned. "Wait, where is your sword?" I held up my empty hand. "You don't see it because I've already put it away." I twitched my fingers slightly. "I have a small inventory." His eyes widened immediately. He nodded slowly. "I see. No wonder you call yourself a merchant." He smiled for an instant, but he quickly turned serious again. "Even so, you fight too well." I shook my head calmly. "It's nothing special. After all, I'm only rank C." The merchant stood motionless. "Rank C?" He looked me up and down in disbelief. "You're so young, and you've already reached the level of a rank C adventurer." He slowly shook his head. "You really surprise me." He paused briefly and looked at me again before asking another question. The merchant kept watching me, as if he were still trying to figure out who I was. After a few seconds, he asked again, "Tell me, what kind of ability did you awaken?" I looked at him calmly. "A merchant-type ability." His expression changed instantly. He slowly shook his head. "What a waste. You have talent with the sword, yet you awakened a trading ability." I couldn't help but smile. "I don't see it that way. The truth is, I prefer trading over the sword." The man fell silent for a moment. Then he smiled. "I see." He nodded slowly. "So, You're a merchant because you chose to be. He adjusted his vest and pointed to his wagon. If you like, I can take you along. I answered without hesitation. I'm heading to Nauerston. His eyes widened in surprise. Nauerston? He smiled immediately. We're heading there too. He turned toward the other merchants and then looked back at me. In that case, hop on the wagon. We still have a long way to go. The road had been far too quiet. The carriage rolled along smoothly, the sound of the wheels breaking the forest's silence. But then, in an instant, the horses grew restless. I looked up and spotted them immediately. A group of kobolds was waiting for us among the trees, but they weren't alone. Howls echoed through the woods. Wolves. I didn't need to think twice. I opened my inventory, and my sword appeared in my hand. The first kobold charged at me. I stepped forward, and with a single motion, I struck him down. The others launched their attack. They tried to surround me, but I had already spotted their positions. I spun around, and my sword cut through two of them in a single stroke. The wolves seized the opportunity. One lunged straight for my throat. I ducked instinctively and countered with an upward slash. The second one barely managed to get close before my sword moved again. In a matter of seconds, silence returned to the road. I sheathed my sword as the last of the bodies hit the ground. The merchant kept watching me without saying a word. Then he slowly urged the wagon forward, and, without taking his eyes off me, he broke the silence once more. The merchant was the first to break the silence. He was still breathing heavily. That was incredible. I shook my head. It was nothing special. I sheathed my sword and replied calmly. They were the weakest of the lot. The man looked at me in surprise. He seemed unable to believe what he had just heard. After a few seconds, he asked again, "So, where did you learn to use a sword?" I let out a soft sigh. It's a long story. I turned my gaze toward the road. I was banished from my family. His expression changed completely. Banished? I nodded. From which family? I remained silent for a few seconds before answering. From the Valkyria family. The merchant's eyes went wide. The Valkyria family? He took a step back, never taking his eyes off me. The house that has produced some of the kingdom's greatest magic warriors? I nodded, making light of it. The merchant was still trying to process what he had just heard, and before we continued on our way, he asked me another question. The carriage rolled on, leaving the forest behind. For a few minutes, neither of us said a word. Then the merchant broke the silence. I understand now. I turned my head slightly to listen. I understand why you're so strong, and why a family like the Valkyrias decided to cast you out. I didn't answer. I simply kept my eyes on the road ahead. The merchant lowered his voice. I am truly sorry. His words sounded sincere. Then he smiled kindly. But even so, I'm sure you'd have a great future as an adventurer. You should give it a try. I rested my chin on my hand, pondering his words. Becoming an adventurer seemed like the most logical choice. I had the strength for it, but for some reason, that path never appealed to me. Trading. That was the only thing I truly wanted. I kept gazing at the scenery without replying, and noticing my silence, the merchant decided to change the subject. After several hours of travel, a city finally appeared on the horizon. It wasn't particularly large, but it was enough for a stopover. The merchant smiled when he saw it. We're finally here. I nodded as the carriage rolled on. As we drew closer, the details of the main gate came into view. Guards stood watch at the entrance, and a small line of merchants waited their turn. Don't worry. The merchant pointed toward the entrance. It's a routine inspection. Every city charges an entry fee. A guard approached the carriage and held out his hand. Entry fee, 5 copper coins. The merchant took out the coins and placed them in the guard's hand without a word of protest. The guard quickly counted them. Then he stepped aside. You may pass. The gates slowly opened, and the carriage began to enter the city. As I gazed at the streets for the first time, something immediately caught my eye. The carriage stopped in the center of town. The moment had come for us to part ways. I stepped down from the wagon and looked at the merchant. Thanks for bringing me here. He smiled. Don't forget what I told you. He pointed to my sword. With that talent, you could become a great adventurer. I nodded with a faint smile. I'll keep that in mind. We said our goodbyes, and I walked on through the streets. The place was bustling with merchants, travelers, and market stalls. As I surveyed the market, someone caught my eye. It was a little girl with wolf ears. She wore worn-out clothes and was selling a small bunch of flowers. I walked over to her. Excuse me, do you know where the Adventurers Guild is? The girl smiled and held up a flower. If you buy one from me, I'll tell you. I didn't argue. I took out a silver coin and placed it in her hand. Her eyes went wide. She looked at the coin, then she looked at me, and still unable to believe what she had just received, she began to speak. The girl put the coin away with great care, as if she feared someone might snatch it from her. Then she looked up and smiled. I'll show you the way. We started walking through the city streets. As we walked, she began to speak. I have a little brother. I glanced at her. He's very small, but I work hard every day to buy him food. She lowered her head with a small smile. I love him very much. I said nothing. I simply opened my inventory. I took out a basket full of freshly baked bread and offered it to her. Here, it's for you and your brother. The girl's eyes widened, as if she couldn't believe it. She took the basket with both hands. Really? I nodded. A huge smile spread across her face. Thank you so much. She kept walking, clutching the basket tightly to her chest. After a few minutes, she stopped and pointed to a massive building. Look, that's the Adventurers Guild. I thanked her. She waved goodbye with a big smile and ran off down the street. I looked up at the building, and before I could step through those doors, something caught my eye. I pushed open the guild door. As soon as I stepped inside, the atmosphere shifted completely. The sounds of conversation, laughter, and clinking mugs filled the hall. Adventurers were everywhere, and, as expected, it didn't take long for them to notice me. Look, a new face. Several of them turned their heads. Just another errand boy. Laughter soon followed. Poor kid. He has no idea what he's getting himself into. I paid them no mind. I simply kept walking toward the counter. The receptionist looked up as soon as I arrived. Welcome. How can I help you? I looked her straight in the eye. I want to register. She smiled kindly. Do you wish to join the Adventurers Guild? I nodded without saying a word. The receptionist took a sheet of paper, placed it on the counter, and began explaining the registration process to me. The receptionist smiled and pulled a form from the counter. To register, you just need to place your fingerprint here. She pointed to a small box, and you'll start as an F-rank adventurer. Then she slid her finger toward the bottom of the document. Although, if you know how to write, you can sign it instead. I looked down at the paper. Then I looked up. Do you know how to read and write? She asked curiously. I nodded without thinking. Yes. The receptionist's eyes widened slightly. In that case, could you sign here? I picked up the pen, but before I could write, I heard several voices behind me. Did you hear that? Did he say he knows how to read and write? The adventurers began to murmur among themselves. That's not exactly common, especially not in someone so young. For a moment, the entire guild turned to look at me again. And this time, it wasn't because I was a rookie. They were waiting to see if I was actually capable of doing it. The receptionist studied me for a few seconds. Then she smiled. If you can read and write, why not work here at the guild? She clasped her hands on the counter. We need staff. Besides, being an adventurer is a very dangerous job. For a moment, I considered it. A steady job, a safe place, not risking my life every day. But I had already walked that path. I remembered the offices, the mountains of paperwork, the identical days, working just to repeat the same routine over and over again. I shook my head. No. The receptionist looked at me in surprise. I'm tired of living like that. I rested my hand on the counter. I didn't come to this world to spend my days behind a desk. I came to build something of my own. The receptionist fell silent. It seemed she hadn't expected an answer like that. Then she picked up the form again and asked me the next question. I finished signing the form. The receptionist checked it for a few seconds. Then she smiled. Perfect. Your registration is complete. She handed me a small metal badge. As of today, you are an F-rank adventurer. I stored it in my inventory. Thank you very much. I was about to leave when I remembered something. One question. Can I sell some monster stones? The receptionist raised an eyebrow. You've already defeated monsters? I nodded. Yes. I took a pouch out of my inventory and placed it on the counter. When I opened it, dozens of magic stones were revealed. The receptionist picked one up. Goblin stone. She picked up another. Wolf stone. Her expression changed completely. She began counting them one by one. 20 goblin stones, 15 imp stones, and 10 wolf stones. She slowly looked up. You obtained all of this? Nearby adventurers stopped talking. One of them stepped closer to look at the contents of the pouch. That's impossible. Another shook his head. An F rank can't gather that many stones on his own. The receptionist looked at me again, and before continuing to count the stones, she asked me another question. The receptionist finished counting the last stone. Then she made some quick calculations. In total, she looked up and smiled. You've earned 5 silver coins. For a moment, the entire guild fell silent. Then the murmurs began. 5 silver coins? That's a huge amount for an F rank. Several adventurers stepped closer to see the stones with their own eyes. Some were surprised. Others simply watched me in silence. The receptionist spoke again. If you really defeated all those monsters, I think you're ready to take the promotion exam. I looked at her with interest. When is it? In 2 days. I nodded without hesitation. Perfect. I want to take the exam. The receptionist smiled as she wrote my name in another logbook. Very well. You're registered. Behind me, the murmuring continued, and one of the adventurers decided to come over and speak to me. I left the guild and started walking through the city streets. As I thought about the promotion exam, laughter caught my attention. It wasn't laughter born of amusement. It was the sound of someone taking pleasure in making another person suffer. I turned into an alleyway, and I recognized her immediately. It was the girl who had guided me to the guild. 3 men had her surrounded, trying to take the bag she was clutching in her arms. Hand over the money. A brat like you doesn't need it. I quickened my pace. What's going on here? The 3 of them turned to look at me. One of them sneered. Get lost, unless you want to end up the same way. I looked at the girl. She was trembling. That was all it took. I stepped forward. The first man had barely raised his fists when my punch landed. He dropped to the ground instantly. The second tried to react. A kick to the jaw knocked him out cold. The third man reached for something inside his clothes. I didn't give him the chance. A single blow was enough to take him down. Silence fell over the alley. The 3 men lay on the ground. I walked over to the girl and held out my hand. Are you okay? She slowly lifted her head. She was still trembling, and with eyes full of tears, she answered me. You are about to take the most important exam of your life. Quick, you can only choose one object, a pen or a pill. The pen contains invisible ink that only you can see. The pill will allow you to perfectly memorize and recall everything you read over the next 2 hours. You've made your choice. The exam starts now. Do you think you'd pass? Or is the price too high for such a powerful object? What would you choose? I led her out of the alley. Not far, but far enough for her to be safe. She sat on some old crates, still trembling a little. I took a closer look at her. She was still just a child. Why were they bothering you? She lowered her gaze. She clutched the basket to her chest. They're bad men. She paused, searching for the words. They have children who work for them. She said it as if it were normal. That was what bothered me the most. I frowned. How many? She shook her head. I don't know. A pause. But there are a lot of them. Silence. I felt something boiling inside me. Children, controlled, used. I took a deep breath. Do you know where they are? She looked up. She hesitated for a second, and then she nodded slowly. In that moment, I understood something. This was no longer just an alleyway problem. It was something much bigger. The girl didn't hesitate. She led me through streets that didn't appear on any maps. The further we went, the worse the place looked, until she stopped. It's here. I looked up. A bar, packed, but not with ordinary people. You could tell instantly. Stay back. I walked in alone. The noise died down the moment I crossed the threshold. All eyes on me. Perfect. Are you the ones who have kids working for you? Silence. Then, laughter. And who are you? One of them stood up. Big. Heavy. Do you want to die? Another approached from the side. You asked for this. He cracked his knuckles. I'm going to teach you not to meddle where you don't belong. I sighed. Same old story. They lunged. Bad move. The first one went down with a single direct hit. The second tried to grab me. I used him as a shield. The third never even saw me coming. After that, it wasn't a fight anymore. It was a cleanup job, one after another. No rhythm, no coordination, no chance. When I finished, the bar was silent, and everyone was on the floor. I straightened my clothes. I looked around, and I thought the same thing I always do. If these were the ones running the show, Then this place was in worse shape than I thought. I thought it was over, but it wasn't. A door at the back opened. What the hell is going on here? The voice was different, firmer, more dangerous. The guy stepped out and froze. He looked at the floor, one by one, all his men, lying there. Then he looked at me, and he understood. He didn't say another word. He lunged straight at me. Fast, but predictable. He tried to strike first. I dodged, grabbed his arm, twisted it, and slammed him into the ground. He was left gasping for air. I pressed down on his neck. Who's behind this? He tried to break free. Useless. Stay out of... He spat blood. Business that isn't yours. I pressed harder. Talk. He laughed. He actually laughed. You're already a dead man. His eyes gleamed, but not with fear. The man we work for. A pause. A crooked smile. He isn't someone you can touch. Silence. He's too powerful for you. He kept laughing. That's when I realized something. This was just getting started. I looked at him for another second. He was still laughing, as if he truly believed that would save him. Don't go near those kids again. I gave him no choice. A sharp blow, and he was out cold. Silence. I glanced at the bar one last time. Everyone was on the floor, but it wasn't enough, because I already knew. This didn't end here. I walked out. The girl was waiting for me outside. She looked at me as if she didn't quite grasp what had just happened. Let's go. We started walking, without rushing, but my mind was elsewhere. That guy was right about one thing. They were just low-level trash. Someone else was pulling the strings, and someone like that doesn't go down after a single fight. I clicked my tongue. This is a problem. I couldn't just stand there doing nothing, but I couldn't attack blindly either. For now, I had to think. I looked up. The market. Let's take a walk. Maybe I'll find something useful. The merchant froze. A curse? His voice changed completely. He picked up the necklace carefully, as if it had suddenly started to burn. No wonder. He swallowed hard. No wonder I was attacked so often. His hands were trembling slightly. There was no longer any doubt. It was no coincidence. I looked at him. Are you going to keep holding on to it? He didn't even hesitate. No. He shook his head quickly. It's not worth it. He looked at the necklace with disdain. And if it has that flaw, he grimaced. It's better not to have it. I nodded. Good. I took it from his hand and simply let it drop to the ground. It made a sharp, dry sound, as if something were breaking, though nothing actually broke. Silence. The merchant let out a breath, relieved. But then he looked beside me. Hey. He narrowed his eyes. Who's that girl? A pause, because in this world, not all encounters are coincidences. The merchant looked at the girl for another moment. He didn't say anything odd, nor did he ask uncomfortable questions. He just nodded. I see. He scratched his head. A street kid, huh? He looked away. Well, it happens all the time. He looked back at me. If you say you'll take responsibility for her, then fine. He didn't ask anything else. That surprised me a little, but I didn't say anything. She'll be with me for now. He just nodded, as if it were no big deal. Then he changed the subject. Hey. He crossed his arms. Are you going to set up your stall here too? I looked at him. Yes. A pause. Where can I ask for permission? The merchant let out a short laugh. Ah. He gestured around. That's the problem. I remained silent. As you can see, he shrugged. I took the last available spot. Silence. Once again, because that meant something clear. This place wasn't as easy as it seemed. The merchant pressed his hands to his chest. I'm sorry. He looked truly regretful. If your stall isn't too big, I can share some space with you. I thought about it for a second. It wasn't ideal, but it was enough to get started. Thanks. I accepted without hesitation. The girl looked up, as if she didn't quite understand. But she looked calmer. The merchant smiled. It's a deal then. But before leaving, I took a closer look at her. Dirty, tired, neglected. I shook my head. First, let's fix that. The merchant understood instantly. Good idea. He crossed his arms. I'll be here. I nodded, and I took her with me. We stopped by a clothing shop. Nothing expensive, but clean, decent. She didn't say much, but her eyes said it all. Then, the public baths. Steam billowed from the entrance. Heat, noise, people. I waited outside. It didn't take long. When she came out, I hardly recognized her. Clean, hair neatly arranged, new clothes, and for the first time, truly smiling. I looked at her for a moment. Now we're set. I exhaled. Because sometimes, fixing something small changes more than it seems. We returned to the stall. The merchant was already waiting. He smiled when he saw me arrive. I thought it would take you longer. I didn't answer. I just nodded. It was time to work. I activated the skill. The shop appeared next to his, quickly, cleanly, as if it had always been there. The merchant stared at it. Wow. He stepped a little closer. That really is impressive. He ran his hand over the structure. I wish I had a skill like that. I glanced at him sideways. What's yours? He smiled. This time, with pride. Persuasion. Silence. I hadn't expected that. Interesting. I crossed my arms. You can sell anything with that. The merchant chuckled. I wish it were that easy. He shook his head. It's rank D. He shrugged. It's not very strong. A pause. But it's helped me survive. I took a closer look at him, because now I understood something. In this world, it's not just the strongest who wins. It's also the one who knows how to sell. I didn't have to do a thing. The aroma did it all. The merchant was the first to notice. Wait. He stepped a little closer to the stall. He took a deep breath. That smells incredible. He looked at the basket, then at me. That bread? He frowned. Just the smell of it makes you hungry. I said nothing. I just watched him. How much? Straight to the point. 2 copper coins. He fell silent. 2? He looked at the bread again. That's the price of an ordinary loaf. I nodded. I know. A pause. He smiled. He took out the coins. Give me one. I handed it to him. He took it. It was still warm. You could tell. He took a bite and froze. His eyes changed. Surprise. Then, shock. He chewed slowly, as if he didn't want it to end. This. He looked at the bread again. It's soft. Another bite. Warm. And finally, the flavor. He shook his head. I've never tasted anything like it. Silence. Because in that moment, I already knew what was going to happen. That bread wasn't normal. The merchant kept looking at the bread, as if he couldn't believe it. This. He took another bite. This should be worth more. He looked at me seriously. At least 5 copper coins. He didn't hesitate. I nodded. You're right. A pause. Because at that moment, I was already thinking. I looked at the basket, then at the girl, and I saw it clearly. Come here. I handed her a basket of bread. She looked at me confused. Go and offer free samples. The merchant reacted immediately. What? He stepped closer quickly. Don't do that. He frowned. Do you want to lose money? I looked at him calmly. Wait. A pause. Just play along. He fell silent, hesitating. And you'll see what happens. Because this wasn't about giving away bread. It was making everyone want it. I watched her walk away with the basket, without fear, just doing what I told her. At first, no one paid her any mind. But that didn't last. The aroma arrived first. It always arrives first. Someone stopped. Hey. He stepped a little closer. That bread smells good. He looked at the basket. How much is it? The girl shook her head. It's a sample. She smiled. I can only give you one. The man hesitated for a second. Then he took it. Free was free. He took a bite, and everything changed. He stood frozen, eyes wide. What? Another bite. A bigger one. This is incredible. His voice rose. Too much. People nearby turned around. What's going on? What is he eating? Another person approached. Can I try some? The girl nodded, one by one. And then, it wasn't just a few anymore. There were many. The reactions repeated. Surprise. Silence. And then, an explosion. It's amazing. I want more. Give me another one. But there were none left. The basket was empty. Silence. Heavy silence. Where do they sell more? The girl didn't hesitate. She turned and pointed. Over there. She smiled. I'll take you there. And in that moment, I knew it had worked. Because now, they weren't looking for bread. They needed it. They didn't take long to arrive. First one, then another, and then they just kept coming. How much is the bread? What does it cost? Where do they sell it? They all said the same thing. I looked at them, calmly. There's a special offer today. Silence. That always works. If you take more than 3 loaves, I held up 3 fingers. They're 2 copper coins each. A pause. The regular price is 5. They looked at each other. A quick calculation. Very quick. Then give me 4. I want 5. Give me 6. They didn't think twice. Not for a second. Because in their minds, they were winning. The flow began. Coins, loaves, hands, constant movement, without a break. Beside me, the merchant said nothing. He just watched. Analyzing. Incredible. He said it quietly. This man. A pause. He has a knack for business. But his expression changed. He looked at the loaves. Then the money. He frowned. Although, he crossed his arms. Giving away the product like that? He shook his head slowly. I don't like it. I didn't answer him. Because he didn't understand yet. This wasn't losing money. It was controlling the market. The flow didn't stop. On the contrary, it began to grow. The customers buying bread didn't leave. They lingered a moment longer. They looked around. And then they saw the stall next door. Hey, what's that? What are you selling here? One would ask, then another. And without realizing it, they started buying too. The merchant was slow to react. But when he did, he was already making sales. Yes, yes, I have this. And this too. Hands in motion. Customers listening. Money changing hands. All at once. He paused for a second. He looked at the flow of people. And then he looked at me. Wow. He smiled. What a stroke of luck meeting you. But I said nothing. Because this was just beginning. Elsewhere, the girl kept going. Basket in hand. A calm smile. Would you like to try some? She stopped in front of a woman. Someone different. Fine clothes. Elegant posture. And someone beside her. A gentleman. Attentive. Cold. The woman looked at the bread. What is that? The girl held out her hand. It's a sample. The aroma wafted over. Strong. Tempting. The woman hesitated. But before she could take the bread, my lady, the gentleman spoke. Seriously, it is not advisable to accept food from strangers. A pause. Especially if it's free. Silence. Because this time, it wouldn't be so easy. The woman did not look away from the bread. Don't worry so much. Her voice was calm. The knight frowned. He didn't like it. But he couldn't disobey either. As you wish, my lady. A pause. His eyes hardened. But if anything happens to you, he lowered his voice. I won't be able to forgive it. Silence. And I will execute those responsible. The woman sighed. There's no need to be so aggressive. She reached out. She took the bread. And in that moment, she felt it. Warm. Freshly baked. Her fingers paused for a second. At first glance, it was perfect. Golden. Soft. Appetizing. She brought it closer. She hesitated only briefly. And took a bite. Silence. Her eyes widened. She said nothing, but her expression said it all. Surprise. Then, fascination. Another bite. Slower, as if trying to understand it. This, she looked at the bread. Who made this? The girl smiled. I'll take you there. And without waiting, she started walking, because now, she wasn't just another customer. She was someone who would change everything. The crowd kept growing. Lines, voices, outstretched hands. The stall was no longer just a simple stall. It was the center of the market. And then, everything went quiet. Not because of silence, but because of a presence. Someone important had arrived. The people parted without realizing it, clearing a path. I saw her, elegant, confident, unlike anyone else. She approached unhurriedly. I am looking for the owner of this stall. It took me a second to realize she was speaking to me. Me. She nodded. Maribel Alaris. A pause. Daughter of the lord of this territory. Silence. I didn't change my expression. I simply inclined my head slightly. A pleasure. What business could someone like you have with a humble vendor? I studied her. She didn't hesitate. Your bread. Direct. It is exceptionally good. She glanced at the basket. I want to take it home. Then she looked at me. How much does it cost? I told her the same price I gave everyone else. There's a special offer. I held up 3 fingers. For more than 3 loaves, 2 copper coins each. A pause. The actual price is 5. She narrowed her eyes, thinking, that is far too cheap for the quality you offer. I didn't answer. I just let her figure it out. It's a peculiar way to sell. I nodded. It works. Silence. And then she smiled. Then I'll do this. A pause. I'll buy 30 loaves from you. She looked at the basket, at the actual price. Silence. Because that was no longer just a sale. It was something else. Genuine interest. And when someone like that takes an interest, everything changes. I didn't like it. From the start, I didn't like it. I can't accept that. I looked at the coins. It's too much. But she didn't change her mind. Not even a little. Take it. Her voice was firm. No room for argument. And then 2 silver coins in my hand. Silence. I looked at them. 1 second. 2. Wait! I looked up. I'll get you the change. But she wasn't looking anymore. She'd already taken the bread and was walking away, just like that, without another word. Hey! She didn't answer. She just kept walking. The gentleman was with her. Without looking back, I stood there, with the coins in my hand, confused, searching for her in the crowd. But she was gone. Only the noise of the market remained, and the smell of the bread. A pause. Because that wasn't a normal purchase. It was something else. And I didn't know if that was good or bad. The sun began to set. The people left. Little by little, the noise faded away, and the stalls began to close. The day was over, but I felt that something had just begun. The market had gone quiet. Nothing like the chaos of a few hours ago. Only a few stalls remained, closing up, and the sound of the wind. I sat down. I took out the coins and counted them. 1 by 1, 10 silver coins. I looked at them for a moment. Not bad. For a single day. It was more than I'd expected, and that was even after giving quite a bit away. But it didn't matter. I shook my head. It was necessary, because this wasn't about today. It was about making sure everyone remembered. I put the coins away, and then I looked at her. The girl was nearby, quiet, watching. I took out a silver coin and held it out to her. This is your pay. A pause. For today. She didn't take it right away. She just looked at it, as if she didn't understand, because for someone like her, that wasn't a small amount. It was too much. And in that moment, I understood something. Not everyone is used to receiving. These videos come entirely from my imagination. Every story, character, and world is an original idea that I develop little by little. If a particular story really resonated with you, please let me know in the comments. That way, I'll know which ones are worth investing more time and energy into developing further. And if a story doesn't quite hit the mark, I'll create a new one based on an even more interesting idea. Ultimately, you decide which worlds deserve to keep growing. See you in the next video.